He is one of the greatest warriors in all of Tolkien's world. His deeds in battle would strike fear into the hearts of his enemies, but his fate would be marred by the curse of Morgoth. Today on Nerd of the Rings, I'm celebrating my 100th video here on the channel by covering the life and travels of Túrin Turambar, the main character of one of my absolute favorite books, The Children of Hurin. Túrin was born in 464 of the First Age, the eldest child of Hurin, the Lord of Dor-lómin, and his wife, Morwen. His younger sister, Urwen, was born 2 years later. She would be called Lalaith, meaning laughter, as she was such a joyful child, and Túrin enjoyed watching her play in the lands of their home. But in the year 469, Morgoth sends out a plague known as the Evil Breath. This plague affects the lands bordering on Fauglith and causes many to become critically ill, primarily the young, including Lalaith and Túrin. Túrin would awake from this terrible sickness, only to discover that Lalaith had died from the plague. 3 years later, just after Túrin turns 8 years old, his father Hurin and the men of Dor-lómin join the armies of Fingon, the High King of the Noldor, in the Western campaign against Morgoth. Hurin is the only known man of Dor-lómin to survive the disastrous Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, and he is taken captive by Morgoth. The Dark Lord places a curse upon Hurin and his kin, saying, "But upon all whom you love my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death." To Dor-lómin, no word comes of Hurin or the battle. What does come is the Easterling men who had betrayed the Union of Maethros in the battle. Morgoth gives to these men the lands of Hithlum, while taking many of the surviving men and elves of the region to be thralls in the mines of Angband. Dor-lómin falls under the rule of Broda, an Easterling lord. During this time, Túrin is kept secret by Morwen, whom the Easterlings initially feared. As the days grow more dangerous, Morwen sends her son with 2 servants to take refuge in the elven realm of Doriath. He leaves behind his home, his mother, and his friend and mentor, Sador, an elderly carpenter of Dor-lómin. In Doriath, Thingol receives Hurin's son, setting the boy on his lap, signifying that the king will raise young Túrin as if he were his own son. Such a fostering had never before been done between elves and men. Even more surprising is that Thingol is the elf to do this, as it was he who lost his daughter Luthien to the love of the man Beren. Thingol sends messengers back to Dor-lómin, inviting Morwen to come live in Doriath, but she refuses. Her pride will not allow her to accept the charity of the king, and the road would be too perilous for her, as she is nearing her due date with Hurin's 3rd child. Túrin would learn of his baby sister Nienor through ongoing messengers of Thingol and Morwen. Morwen also sends to her son the dragon helm of Dor-lómin, a great helmet and heirloom of his house, created by the dwarf smith Telkar with its own long history. It had been gifted from the dwarf king Azagal to Maethros, from Maethros to Fingon, and from Fingon to Hador, the first lord of Dor-lómin, and passed through his line, finally coming to Túrin. Thingol set the helm to be kept in his armory until Túrin should grow old enough to wear it. As he grows, Túrin is trained in the ways of the elves, learning hunting, archery, sword fighting, and how to speak the elven tongue. Much of this he learns from one of the greatest elves of the First Age, Beleg the Strongbow. As the years pass, Túrin grows more and more eager to join the fight against Morgoth in the northern lands of Middle-earth. He also grows in stature. Finally, in 481, at the age of 17, Turin takes up the Dragon Helm and joins Beleg in the battles against the orcs near Dimbar. Together, they become warriors of great renown, with the helm and the bow striking fear into the servants of Morgoth. Throughout Beleriand, it is known that the Dragon Helm has been seen again, and many come to believe that Hurin himself had escaped the very pits of hell. 3 years later, Turin returns to Doriath for a short respite in order to repair his weaponry and rest from battle. He comes to Thingol's halls while the king is away and sits at a table with some of the great elf lords of Doriath. Sairos, a member of the king's court who is jealous of Turin, taunts him, saying, "If the men of Hithlum are so wild and fell, of what sort are the women of that land? Do they run like the deer, clad only in their hair?" At this, Turin picks up a cup and throws it at Sairos, striking him in the face, greatly wounding both his face and his pride. The next day, Sairos attempts to ambush Turin, but Turin is far mightier and disarms Sairos. In order to humiliate the elf, Turin strips him of his clothes and tells him to run back to Menegroth, like the deer. With Turin egging him on in pursuit, Sairos attempts to leap across a ravine, but falls and strikes his head upon a rock, ending his life. The elves of the court saw only Turin's later actions, not those of Sairos, and asked Turin to return to Menegroth for the king's judgment. Rather than stay around to be judged by Thingol upon the king's return, Turin goes into the wild alone and comes to the forest of Brethil. There he comes upon a group of roughly 60 outlaws, known as the Gaurwaith, or Wolfmen, who prey on all, orcs, and even other groups of man. They surround Turin, and as they are questioning him, one of their number rashly fires his bow. Turin dodges the arrow, picks up a stone, and throws it at the archer, killing him on the spot. Turin points out to the group that they can accept him as a new member, or try to kill him, though he will take many of them with him before he falls. The outlaws, led by a man named Forweg, agree to take Turin in place of the lost man. Turin joins the outlaws, giving himself the name Nathan, the Wronged. The following year, Turin, walking alone one day, comes across a woman fleeing through the woods. The man pursuing her jumps out, and Turin kills him to save the woman from her attacker. Only after another member of the Wolfmen follows does he realize the slain man was Forweg, their leader. Turin is then made captain of the Gaurwaith. Sickened by the realization of what this group has done to terrorize their fellow man, he declares that they shall now only prey on the orcs of Morgoth. Meanwhile, in Doriath, the truth comes forward about Sairos' attack, and Thingol in turn sends Beleg to seek out Turin and bring him back to Doriath with the king's pardon. Beleg comes across the Gaurwaith, but Turin refuses to go back to Doriath, scorning the land of his youth. Unable to convince his friend, Beleg returns to Doriath. As more orcs enter the area of Brethil, the Gaurwaith are forced to relocate south. Turin's company comes across 3 petty dwarves, a smaller race of dwarves descended from exiles out of the dwarf cities in the east of Middle-earth. Mim, one of these petty dwarves, is captured by the outlaws, while arrows are shot at his sons Ibun and Him. Mim agrees to allow the outlaws to live in his halls of Aman-Ruth in exchange for his life, and leads the group to the hill. When they arrive, they discover Him has been killed by one of the arrows. Turin shows great remorse for the death of Mim's son, and Mim honors his word to let the men stay in his halls, and even comes to care for Turin. After Beleg returns to Doriath, he asks the king's leave to return to his friend in the wild. Thingol grants Beleg's wish and sends him with a sword of his choosing, Anglachel, the Black Sword. In that year of 487, Beleg returns to Turin, and brings him gifts from Doriath, returning to him the dragon helm of Dor-lómin, as well as Lembas from Queen Melian. Once again, this is a momentous occurrence, as Lembas had never before been given to mortal men, and would seldom be done so again. Beleg joins Turin, and once again they accomplish great deeds in the struggle against Morgoth. Turin becomes a great lord among men, and is now called Gorthal, the Dread Helm. Due to the incredible deeds of valor of Turin and Beleg, the land itself becomes known as the Land of Bow and Helm, and people would come from other regions to follow Turin in fighting back against Morgoth. Sadly, the lordship of Turin would be betrayed by their host. Mim, the petty dwarf, encounters a group of orcs and agrees to betray the group on the condition that Turin would not be slain, and that Beleg would be left for Mim to kill. Thus, the House of Ransom falls to the orcs of Morgoth. Turin is taken captive and led away, and Beleg is left bound. Beleg escapes, Mim flees in fear, and the elf pursues the orcs north toward Angband. He tracks the group to Tar Nufuin, where he meets the elf Gwyndor, who had escaped slavery under Morgoth. Together they infiltrate the orc camp and rescue Turin, but as Beleg is cutting his bonds, his hand slips and he pricks Turin. Turin, unaware and in a state of delirium, believes the orcs have returned to torture him and flies into a rage. He kills Beleg with the sword Anglakel. As lightning flashes across the sky, he sees the lifeless body of his dearest friend. Turin, now in a state of uttermost despair and in a daze, is led by Gwyndor to the pools of Ivrin, which bring him back to his senses. The pair then proceed to Nargothrond, where Gwyndor had dwelt before his captivity. There, Turin gives himself the name Agarwain, son of Umarth, meaning blood-stained, son of ill fate. However, his secret identity wouldn't last long. Finduilas, the daughter of King Orodreth, comes to love Turin, but since she had been betrothed to Gwyndor before his capture and maiming, Turin avoided her out of respect for his friend. Gwyndor, however, sees the way Finduilas looks at Turin, and in his jealousy, reveals to her his true identity. Learning of this, Orodreth gives Turin great honor in Nargothrond. Due to his great experience in war, Turin over time becomes the chief counselor of Orodreth, who follows nearly all of his advice, including the building of a great bridge crossing the river Narog by the gates of the hidden city. Also at Turin's behest, they abandon their strategy of secrecy and move to more open war with the forces of Morgoth. Turin takes the sword of Beleg and has it reforged by the elven smiths. Its new name is Gorthang, Iron of Death. Turin's deeds with this weapon earn him the name Mormegil, the Black Sword. With Turin revealed to him once more, Morgoth sends Glaurung, the father of dragons, to Nargothrond. And despite messengers from Círdan bringing the words of the Vala Ulmo that they should destroy the bridge and fortify the city, Turin convinces Orodreth to ride out and meet the oncoming host of Angband. Thus, in the fall of 495, they meet their enemy in the disastrous Battle of Tumald, where Orodreth is killed and Gwyndor is mortally wounded. Turin grabs his friend and bears him away from the battle. There, with his last words, Gwyndor deems that Turin must save Finduilas, for she is the only chance for him to avoid the curse upon him. Turin returns to Nargothrond to find it sacked by the orcs of Morgoth and the great dragon. As he comes to the city, he is trapped by the gaze of Glaurung. Still as a statue he stands as Finduilas and the captives of Nargothrond are led past him en route to Angband. Glaurung taunts Turin, saying,
"Hail, son of Hurin, well met."
He goes on to say,
"As thralls thy mother and thy sister live in Dor-lómin, in misery and want. Thou art arrayed as a prince, but they go in rags. And for thee they yearn, but thou carest not for that. Glad may thy father be to learn that he hath such a son, as learn he shall.
Glaurung releases Turin from his gaze, who is now faced with a choice: to pursue the orcs and rescue Finduilas, or heed the words of the dragon and return home to Dor-lómin for the sake of his mother and sister. As Turin heads toward Dor-lómin, the great dragon is glad, for his evil purposes have come to bear, and he is left to rule Nargothrond as a dragon king. In November 495, Turin once again passes the pools of Ivrin, where he is spotted by Tuor, who has no idea that the man passing in the distance is his own cousin. Finally, in early 496, Turin returns to Dor-lómin, 23 years after leaving as a small boy. There he meets Sador once again, and learns the truth about Morwen and Nienor. They were not thralls in Dor-lómin, but had left for Doriath a year earlier. In his rage at the mistreatment of his people, Turin kills Broda, and the people of Dor-lómin rise up against the Easterlings in his hall, leaving none alive. Sador, one of those who rose up against their enemies, dies in the skirmish. Turin's actions will once again prove hazardous to those around him, for they know that the Easterlings will only persecute the people of Dor-lómin all the more for these actions. Turin and those who are able travel south, fleeing Dor-lómin. Turin attempts to pick up the trail of the orcs who had taken Finduilas, which leads him to Brethil. He meets the woodmen of the region, who mournfully tell him that Finduilas had been killed by the orcs, and they lead him to her grave. Turin collapses on the mound in weariness and despair, and is taken by the men to their settlement, known as Brandir. In Brethil, he is tended by their leader, Brandir, until the darkness passes. Turin, in his pride, takes the name Turambar, Master of Fate, declaring that his curse was now over. Turin leads the able-bodied soldiers of Brethil in hunting the orcs who pass their lands. One day, later in 496, Turin and his men come across a woman lying naked on the Hauth en Eleth, the grave of Finduilas. This woman has no idea her name, where she came from, or even how to speak. Turin covers her in his cloak and gives her the name Niniel and leads her back to Brandir. Over the coming months, she learns to speak and comes to care for the man she knows as Turambar. 2 years later, they are wed on Midsummer's Day. Later that year, as orcs begin raiding Brethil, Turin once again takes up the black sword Gurthang to wreak havoc on Morgoth's forces. Word of this reaches Nargothrond, and in the spring of 499, Glaurung issues forth, heading toward Brethil. Around this time, Niniel becomes pregnant with Turin's child. As word comes to Brethil of the coming of the dragon, Turin puts a plan into motion. Believing that Glaurung is likely to cross the river Teglin, where the gap in the ravine is thin, he heads to Kabed and Aras and waits below. As Glaurung heaves his front legs to the other side, Turin plunges Gurthang into the belly of the dragon, all the way up to the hilt. As he comes upon the mortally wounded dragon, Turin gloats. "Hail, worm of Morgoth! Well met again! Die now, and the darkness have thee! Thus is Turin, son of Hurin, avenged!" But as Turin heaves the sword from the dragon, black blood covers his hand, causing him to swoon into a deep, dark, unconscious state. Meanwhile, Niniel could not bear to stay behind, unaware of the fate of her beloved, and she came to that place, and Glaurung, as he is dying, would speak his last words to her, for this was not their first meeting.
"Hail, Nienor, daughter of Hurin. we meet again ere the end. I give thee joy that thou hast found thy brother at last, and now thou shalt know him, a stabber in the dark, treacherous to foes, faithless to friends, and a curse unto his kin. Turin, son of Hurin. But the worst of all his deeds thou shalt feel in thyself.
With that, Glaurung dies, and his spell is lifted, and in that moment she remembered her past, of fleeing Nargothrond after the dragon had taken her memory, of traveling to Doriath searching for her kin, of her childhood in Dor-lómin, and of her mother, Morwen. And Niniel is left with the knowledge that she is truly Nienor, sister of Turin. Believing Turin to be dead, and driven by grief for all that she had learned, Nienor Niniel casts herself from the brink of Cabed and Aras, and is lost forever to the river. With the death of Glaurung, Turin awakes from his swoon, and returns to the men of Brethil. There, Brandir tells him all he had overheard from the dragon, and that Niniel was Nienor, his sister. Refusing to believe, Turin kills Brandir, thinking him a slanderer. That very day, he learns from Mablung, an elf of Doriath, that his sister had indeed gone missing at Nargothrond, and describes her appearance just as Turin had known his wife. Overcome with the weight of an entire life of deeds gone awry, Turin goes back to Cabed and Aras, and turns to Gurthang to end his life. He casts himself upon the sword, ending the line of Hurin. There, the men of Brethil bury their captain and the shards of Gurthang. On the mound they set a stone, the Stone of the Hapless, which reads, Túrin Turambar, Dagnir Glaurunga, Turin, conqueror of fate, slayer of Glaurung. And they also carved the name Nienor Niniel. 2 years later, in 501, Hurin, having been released by Morgoth, finds Morwen at the stone, mourning the loss of their children. She dies in Hurin's arms and is buried alongside their son. This site would be one of the very few to survive the destruction of Beleriand. It lives on even into the Third Age and beyond as the Isle of Tol Morwen. In Tolkien's earlier versions of the Silmarillion, it was prophesied that Turin would play a large role in the Dagor-Dagorath, the final battle with Morgoth at the ending of the world. When the world is much older and the gods weary, Morgoth will come back through the door, and the last battle of all will be fought. Fionwe will fight Morgoth on the plain of Valinor, and the spirit of Turin shall be beside him. It shall be Turin who with his black sword will slay Morgoth, and thus the children of Hurin shall be avenged. The tale of the children of Hurin is indeed one of Tolkien's most tragic, but it's also one of my favorite, for its depth, characters, and connections to the larger story of Middle-earth. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it, especially the audiobook version read by Christopher Lee, which is incredible. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a video from the world of Middle-earth here on Nerd of the Rings. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, including Tom DeBombadil19, Gail Elizabeth, Jim Limber Davis, Sky Carcass, Salim Rahman, Smorzerk, Zetrock, Gimokad, Grand Strategy Nerd, Chief 40123, Dark Haired One, Brig Taylor, and Debbie. Also, if you enjoyed the artwork in this video, be sure to check the artists in the description and visit them online to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.